Good afternoon or morning, perhaps. I am working on chapter 4 of The Power of a Teacher by Adam Saenz. Chapter 4 is titled Emotional Well-Being. Every time I look at my lesson plans, I feel panic. My heart races and I can feel my body getting tense. When it's really bad, I get these headaches that last for 2 days. Call me crazy, but sometimes I honestly don't know who I can trust and who I can't on this campus. Maybe I've just been stabbed in the back one too many times. The teacher who is not experiencing emotional well-being typically struggles with feeling paralyzed by difficult circumstances and or moods that are either avoided or poorly controlled. This emotional turmoil also tends to contribute to unhealthy interpersonal interactions with both personal and professional settings. If I am that teacher, I am experiencing a life that seems stifled, unfulfilled, and unfair. And as much as I want to acknowledge it, I probably am, at some level, an emotional drain on those who depend on me. Are you that teacher? If so, your hope lies in the reality that you have power to truly experience and express the complete normal range of emotions in ways that are healthy and life-giving both to you and those around you. You also have power to release yourself from the emotionally toxic wells of unforgiveness and resentment that steal joy from your life on a daily basis. What is emotional well-being? Defining emotional well-being isn't quite as straightforward as defining physical well-being, which can be quantified in measurable terms like weight and activity. Generally, though, emotional well-being can be thought of as the degree to which we are able to appropriately experience and express the wide range of emotions that are part of the human experience. This component of our overall well-being, most of us are prone to neglect. We often mistake the lack of any overt psychological symptoms for emotional health. But is that really wellness? Are we satisfied to simply not be a wreck? Though it may require some work and at times painful self-assessment, working toward emotional well-being is crucial to your contentment and success, both as a teacher and as a human being. Emotional well-being, the keys. Key number 1, appropriately experience and express emotion. Emotions are often categorized as either positive, for example, happy, enthusiastic, confident, or negative, angry, frustrated, anxious. I try to avoid parking emotions in either category because any emotion can be positive or negative depending on how we understand it in a given context. As we consider our ability to experience and express emotion, it may be more helpful to think of emotions as comfortable or uncomfortable. Comfortable emotions, generally, are those that we feel most capable of experiencing and expressing, and uncomfortable emotions are those that we feel least capable of experiencing or expressing. Our English word emotion comes from a Latin root meaning to move. We can think of any emotion as a fuel source. When I refer to experiencing an emotion, I'm referring to the act of allowing the fuel into the emotional fuel tank simply by acknowledging its presence. When I refer to expressing an emotion, I'm referring to the act of converting the emotional fuel into an action. Much of how we understand emotion is rooted in our childhood experience. Believe it or not, that's not just a stereotype for sitcom psychologists. It's true. In an ideal situation, parents or primary caregivers are continually modeling A, that all emotions are acceptable, though not always necessarily pleasant for experience, and B, that all emotions can be expressed in ways that contribute to the emotional well-being of all individuals in the family. As those of us who have children will attest, though that ideal situation doesn't always play out in practice, even in the healthiest of families, our day-to-day lives are prone to communicate spoken and unspoken rules about which emotions are acceptable and unacceptable for experience, and we run the risk of expressing emotions with words and actions that can be harmful to those around us. In The Different Drum, Community Making and Peace, American psychiatrist M. Scott Peck eloquently describes the emotional environment in his family of origin. Each of my parents was responsible and caring. There was plenty of warmth, affection, laughter, and celebration. The only problem was that certain emotions were unacceptable. My parents had no difficulty being angry, but never one in all my years of growing up did I ever hear either of my parents say that they were anxious or worried or scared or depressed or anything to indicate that they felt other than on top of things and in total control of their lives. The problem is that I was not free to be me. Peck would go on to experience debilitating anxiety and depression as a young adult because experiencing and appropriately expressing those emotions were not modeled for him in childhood. Did you grow up in a family in which a certain emotion was not permitted? Anger, for example? Or maybe experiencing anger was permitted, but it was expressed in a way that was damaging to members of the family, perhaps through verbal or physical aggression. If so, you likely did not learn as a child to appropriately experience and express your anger as an adult. You probably learned long ago to talk to yourself out of feeling angry, and now you no longer are able to recognize it when it knocks. You probably learned to focus on verbal and behavioral feedback that convinces you that you are doing the right thing by avoiding anger. You're such a laid-back person. I've never seen you get angry. I love that about you. This pattern only reinforces the limitation. This same unhealthy pattern can develop around any emotion that makes us feel uncomfortable, even happiness. Yes, there can be immediate benefits to stifling emotions. Again, emotions are fuel, and avoiding emotions in the short term relieves us of the psychological work of having to acknowledge and express them. But what long-term risks are we running? As we avoid emotion, we lose the authenticity of our human experience. Practically, that loss of authenticity translates into less effective relational interaction between you and your students, you and your colleagues, and you and your family and friends. Key number 2, practice requesting and extending forgiveness. When we are wronged, our instinctive response is to seek retaliation. Italian psychiatrist Roberto Assagiali aptly noted that without forgiveness, life is governed by an endless cycle of resentment and retaliation. The endless cycle he is referring to here has also been called a life trap by psychologists Jeffrey Young and Janet Klosko. In their book, Reinventing Your Life, Young and Klosko present the powerful clinical cases of individuals who have become stuck in life due to issues of unforgiveness. Essentially, until we find resolution and healing through forgiveness in relationships, even when we escape those particular relationships through divorce, ended friendships, the death of the other person, etc., we are prone to recreate them in an attempt to find resolution and freedom. A classic example of a life pattern playing out can be found in the individual who repeatedly ends up in destructive romantic relationships. The key to healing is not found in compensating for one broken relationship with another, but in true forgiveness. Our relational patterns offer us evidence that we need to forgive, particularly when we find ourselves engaged in relational patterns in which themes emerge: fear of being abandoned, fear of being taken advantage of, unhealthy dependence, unrelenting standards, entitlement, and fear of healthy interdependence are all characteristics of unhealthy motives in relationship building. Webster's defines forgiveness this way: to grant free pardon and to give up all claims on account of an offense or debt. I counsel my patients that forgiveness is simply surrendering the right we think we have to punish someone for the pain they've caused us. When we reach that point of surrender, we become free to engage relationally from a healthier base. In my practice, I've worked with patients who were able to give or receive forgiveness simply because they've developed false assumptions about the nature of forgiveness. Through our sessions, as we uncovered the true nature of forgiveness, their capacity to forgive increased dramatically. Let's examine 3 myths about forgiveness. Myth number 1: I can't forgive them because they won't admit to wrongdoing. Truth: we are in complete control of our ability to forgive, and we do not need a confession of guilt from the offending party to offer forgiveness. While this situation is not ideal, It is sometimes necessary. You are not cursed to carry unforgiveness indefinitely until or unless someone else changes. Myth number 2. I must forgive and forget. Truth. Forgetting may take years if it happens at all. Many people make the mistake of believing that remembering the painful experience is necessarily evidence that forgiveness has not occurred. Not so. In reality, extending forgiveness is the first step in our healing, and as we heal, we are likely to have clear memories of the painful experience. So I don't necessarily have to forgive and forget, but I almost certainly have to forgive to heal. An analogy. Let's say I'm playing basketball with someone and they intentionally foul me and break my finger in the process. Whether they admit to wrongdoing, I am free to forgive them, to free myself from the negative emotion of unforgiveness and the lie that I have to punish them emotionally to bring justice to my broken finger. As my finger heals, though, every time I touch it, I will feel pain, and that pain will remind me of the foul. Eventually, my finger will heal, and I will be able to touch it without automatic memories of the painful foul. In fact, memories of the foul will grow less frequent. The real evidence of forgiveness, then, isn't whether I'm still remembering the foul, but whether I'm in the process of healing such that I'm able to engage that person and anyone else I meet on the court without unnecessary anger, defensiveness, spite, or vengeance. Forgiveness is largely an intellectual decision to surrender a debt we feel we're owed. Healing, on the other hand, is the sometimes long and always emotion-laden process of clearing out the powerful feelings associated with the debt. Extending forgiveness can be a relatively quick process. Reaching healing, however, can take much longer. Myth number 3. If I forgive them, I'm just asking them to hurt me again. Truth. Forgiveness does involve our surrendering a debt we feel we're owed, but it does not mean that we do not take appropriate measures to wisely steward our lives moving forward. Let's go back to the example of the foul in basketball. Again, I can forgive the other player even if they insistently deny wrongdoing or culpability. However, if I find myself unable to communicate with the other player about the foul, how did that happen? What do you consider a foul? Have you fouled before? Was I doing something I shouldn't have been doing? How can we make sure something like this doesn't happen again? Then certainly I will think twice about stepping on the court with them again. The goal in this analogy is not to play basketball with only those whom we know will not injure us, but to play basketball with those who respect us enough as a player to engage in honest dialogue when things like this come up. The key is that we don't change what we do to punish the other person or create a harbor for our own anger and unforgiveness. While the act of forgiving can be difficult, there are numerous benefits to extending forgiveness. Catherine Peiterman, PhD and staff chaplain at the Mayo Clinic, Rochester, Minnesota, encourages wronged individuals to move away from your role as victim and release the control and power the offending person and situation have had in your life. As you let go of grudges, you'll no longer deny your life by how you've been hurt. Researchers have linked unforgiveness with a wide range of mental and physical disorders, including depression, anxiety, eating disorders, nicotine dependence, headaches, and physical tension. Clinging to unforgiveness inevitably damages you far more than it punishes the offending party. Conversely, research has also identified several key adaptive quality of life characteristics of individuals who practice forgiveness: empathy, emotional intelligence, life satisfaction, and spiritual well-being. Conclusion. Jennifer is clearly lacking emotional wellness. Feeling stabbed in the back and not knowing whom you can trust at work are not good building blocks for a professional community. Her harboring unforgiveness hurts her in at least 2 ways. First, it keeps her from finding emotional healing from her past wounds, and second, it keeps her from developing healthy collegial relationships on her current campus. Underestimating the importance of emotional well-being is one of the most predictably devastating choices a teacher can make. Unfortunately, it is also one of the most common, not only for teachers, but for all of us. We tell ourselves that we don't have time to deal with our emotional struggles. We resist because we know it will require us to be vulnerable. We lash out when anyone gets too close to our emotional weaknesses or wounds. All of those responses are understandable, but the consequences of allowing them to control us are significant. We find ourselves deeply frustrated with the inappropriate expressions of those around us, yet we find ourselves resisting what we can change, our own emotional well-being, including and maybe especially our willingness to forgive. This again is good news. Your emotional health as a teacher and as a person is not dependent on the health of those around you. You can grow emotionally, and as you do, your capacity for forgiving and fostering meaningful relationships with students, with other teachers, with administrators, and with your family and friends will also grow. Summary. Emotion is fuel. To experience an emotion, fill the tank, is simply to acknowledge its presence. To express the emotion is to convert the fuel into action. I can't or I must beliefs about emotion deteriorate emotional wellness by keeping us from experiencing and expressing emotion appropriately, imprisoning us as victims of our own emotions. Forgiveness is critical to emotional wellness. Since we need resolution and freedom, unforgiveness of others or ourselves locks us into repetitive, maladaptive relational patterns. Emotional well-being. Recommendations for action. Number 1. Do ask someone you trust to give you honest feedback about whether you seem to have difficulty experiencing or expressing any particular emotion. Ask them to give you examples or situations in which you have acted irrationally. Be sure to assure them that it's safe for them to be honest. Just listen and don't defend yourself. Thank them for their honesty. Number 2, reflect on your family of origin experience. What was modeled for you as a child? Which emotions were and were not allowed, and how were the allowed emotions expressed? Number 3, do connect in person or by phone with someone you need to forgive. If direct contact is not practical or feasible, choose to extend forgiveness this moment, even if they cannot or will not admit to wrongdoing. Remember, surrender the right you think you have to punish them for the harm they've caused you. Your forgiving means that debt is canceled. Number 4, do connect in person or by phone with someone you've offended to request their forgiveness. Number 5, create a time of quiet and solitude to forgive yourself for poor choices you have made in the past. After you forgive yourself, give yourself freedom not to punish yourself any further for the offense. Accept yourself warmly and be kind to yourself. Sometimes we fail to extend the grace and love to ourselves that we would extend to a friend without thought or hesitation. Number 6, do love yourself well by being patient as you allow yourself and relationships to heal. Number 7, do, if necessary, schedule an appointment with a counselor to explore difficulties experiencing and or expressing emotions. Counseling can be very helpful in providing guidance and structure in situations in which extending or receiving forgiveness is needed. Number 8, do watch Brené Brown's TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability. Yes, I already recommended this. Watch it again. It's worth it. And there's the link. Number 1, don't minimize the negative impact harboring unforgiveness has on your emotional well-being. For example, whatever, it's no big deal. I'll just forget it and move on. Number 2, don't talk yourself out of having a tough conversation with anyone with whom you have experienced conflict. Number 3, don't fall into the trap of allowing moments of forgiveness to become opportunities for greater conflict or deeper hurt. Whether you're seeking forgiveness or extending it, the goal is cancel debt, not one last chance to explain yourself or focus on your pain. All right, here's a little excerpt titled Mr. Saracen's Power to Change Tina Sabaku's Life. When I first met Mr. S, I could tell right away that he was going to be up my alley. He wore fun ties, purple shirts, smelled good, smiled a lot, and had kind, caring eyes. He also had an uncanny ability to excite his students about whatever he was teaching, making us feel like we were part of what was going on in the classroom and not just being taught at. Mr. S nurtured creativity in his students. Here's the best example. Every month, each homeroom had a special mass in the small chapel in our Catholic school. Mr. S would see to it that our mass was truly special. He would always choose a theme and or ask us to help choose a theme. Then he invited us to decorate the chapel thematically. I can still picture how the chapel looked on the day we celebrated all God's creatures. He invited us to each bring a favorite stuffed animal and place it in the front of the altar. As always, I went overboard and brought about 15 stuffed animals. I remember him being happy that I was excited about sharing them instead of chastising me, as some of my former teachers might have. I love that I can still see that altar and that I still feel so special about creating that mass. To this day, I am considered theme queen, not only in my social life, giving parties and decorating my home, but even more important in my life's work. I created my whole company, Arts Alive, based on the notion of how the use of theme can ignite the spark in a child and excite her or him about whatever is being taught. Mr. S was instrumental in unleashing my creativity and teaching me the difference between doing paint-by-numbers art that was opposed to true art. When people ask what I do, they often ask, "How did you ever come up with that?" I simply say, "I just made it up." Thanks, Mr. S, for encouraging me to make stuff up. Written by Tina Sabaku, an artist. All right, questions for discussion. Number 1. Would you rather be stuck in an elevator with someone who likes to talk too much or someone who hardly talks at all? Dr. Saenz says, definitely someone who hardly talks at all. I would just enjoy the quiet and meditate. Usually, once people find out I'm a psychologist, they have 16 questions, either about their kids or their mother-in-law. Number 2, look at the feelings listed at the end of the chapter. Which emotions were restricted in your childhood? Which emotions were demanded in your childhood? Which emotion is easiest for you to experience or most comfortable? And which emotion is most difficult for you to experience or least comfortable? Dr. Saenz says, most of what I saw growing up was the use of anger as a fuel to shame and to punish. As a result, I never allowed myself to experience anger because I was afraid I would express it similarly. Anger is still probably the least comfortable emotion for me to experience and express, and only as an adult am I really learning to express and experience anger appropriately. The emotion that is most comfortable for me, drawing from the list at the end of the chapter, is enthusiasm. I'm sort of a big picture visionary type, and I love getting other people excited about good ideas. I'm not nearly as skilled with the details involved in the execution of a good idea. Number 3, would you describe yourself as a forgiving person? If so, why do you suppose you're able to forgive? If not, what prevents you from being able to forgive? Do you believe reluctance or inability to forgive makes you a healthier person? Have you ever found yourself on the other end, being unforgiven by someone who felt wronged by you? Dr. Saenz says, I would not describe myself as a forgiving person. I forgive when it's necessary, but unfortunately that's usually only after I'm convinced that forgiveness is the only option versus just trying to forget it and act like nothing ever happened or retaliate via severe tar and feather. Some of that's probably linked to my difficulty experiencing and expressing anger. When I was working on my master's degree, I worked as a case manager for a foster placement agency. A co-worker falsely accused me of sharing personal information with our boss. She said she had word-of-mouth evidence. Gossip. I denied it, but she didn't believe me, and there was a pretty big rift in our working relationship. After about a week, I asked her to forgive me. She said she did, but our interaction was never the same after that still. How might not being able to experience and or express emotion impact your interaction with your students, with your colleagues? Dr. Saenz doesn't answer that one. But here's his list of emotions. Able, adequate, agonize, anger, annoyed, anxiety, anxious, apathy, apprehensive, assured, awe, bored, burdened, capable, cautious, certain, charmed, cheerful, comfortable, compassion, competitive, concerned, confidence, confused, content, courageous, delighted, depressed, destructive, determined, disappointed, disgusted, distracted, doubtful, eager, elation, embarrassment, empathy, energetic, enthusiastic, envy, exasperated, excellent, excited, exhausted, exhilarated, expectant, fascinated, fear, frustrated, glad, glamorous, glorious, good, graceful, grateful, great, greed, grief, guilty, happy, harassed, hesitant, hopeful, hostile, humorous, ignored, impatient, indifferent, inspired, interested, intimidated, irritated, isolated, jealous, joyful, jumpy, lively, lonely, love, mad, magnificent, manipulated, miserable, obnoxious, overwhelmed, panic, peaceful, playfulness, pleasant, pleasure, positive, powerful, pressured, pride, relaxed, relieved, remorse, revenge, sad, satisfied, scared, shocked, shame, stable, stress, sublime, superior, surprised, suspicious, sympathy, thrilled, tired, uncomfortable, uneasy, used, worry, wasteful, weary, wishful. That is the end of chapter 4 in The Power of a Teacher.